A longtime U.S. resident being denied re-entry to New Hampshire from New Brunswick is feeling new concerns over Canadians traveling to the U.S. Christopher Landry, who has a green card, says U.S. border agents barred him from returning to the country after visiting family in New Brunswick. Now, according to Landry, U.S. officials told him his 2004 and 2007 cannabis possession and driving with a suspended license convictions made him now inadmissible to the U.S. For an update on what's happening at the Canada-U.S. border, we're joined this morning from South Bend, Indiana, once again by immigration lawyer Stuart Friedman. Welcome back.
Thank you.
So I know you're familiar with this case. Landry says he used the same main border crossing that he used for the last 20 years or so when he visits Canada. Can you walk us through why he would have had problems now?
I sure can. One of the things you need to do when you're talking about Mr. Landry is remember that he's a permanent resident. So the fact that he was turned back is somewhat surprising. U.S. Customs gets full access to the Canada Police Information System Center, or CPIC. We can see most Canadian convictions or arrests when somebody crosses. But when an officer looks at a record, they have an element of discretion. They look at it to see whether or not the person has been convicted of a crime involving moral turpitude or most drug offenses. But marijuana is interesting because if you're a permanent resident, you can have one arrest for use or possession, not sales, under 30 grams and still get in. And a number of U.S. offenses or Canadian offenses are not ones that will render you inadmissible. Unlike Canada, we look at the specific crime to see whether it's a crime involving moral turpitude. And driving on a suspended license can go either way. It depends on whether the jurisdiction that convicts you requires that you know your license is suspended at the time you operate the motor vehicle. And in some of these cases, a border agent gives a permanent resident the benefit of the doubt. But that benefit of the doubt is disappearing under the new administration. U.S. Customs officers are being told to resolve doubts against inadmission, to resolve doubts in favor of detention in some cases. Canadians have it a little bit better when they cross at a land border because we will turn you back rather than detain you. But if he has been coming from, say, Mexico, he would have been detained.
Landry, we understand, is separated from his partner and his 5 children. And again, he's been going back and forth and living, setting up his life for the last 2 decades. What steps is he going to need to do to be able to return home? If this is at the discretion of a border crossing agent, where does he go to get that reversed?
Well, Mr. Landry's actually been referred to an immigration court, and he will get a hearing as to his admissibility. But because he was turned back, however painful it is to be separated from your family, at least he's not detained. Many people are detained while they sort things out. And last week we saw a change in U.S. policy to say that we should not give bail in many of these cases. So people really need to do a self-check and see what their vulnerabilities are before they attempt a crossing in this era.
Yeah, not to mention the fact that he's also not able to work while he's here in Canada. His job's down south of the border. When you and I last spoke in March about the new U.S. long-term travel registration rules, for Canadians, what concerns have you been hearing since the spring from your clients?
Well, I'm seeing cases where people crossed without incident for years, like Mr. Landry, and are now having problems. I'm seeing more and more people, even when they get in, getting detained for 3 or 4 hours at secondary inspection by U.S. Customs while they sort the matters out. I advise anybody who's had a criminal contact who believes they're admissible to come fully armed. Have certified copies, if possible, of your court file, because they're wanting to see this more and more. Now, Mr. Landry was a permanent resident, which means U.S. Customs had the duty to determine that he was inadmissible. Most people, Canadians crossing the border in particular, have the duty to show that they are admissible when they're questioned. So it's flipped. He should have had an easier time, but obviously he didn't. And one of the things that I advise people is to cross at Canadian pre-clearance facilities where possible because U.S. Customs has less power. At a land port of entry, they have something they can do called expedited removal, which gives you a 5-year bar, which our Supreme Court, the United States Supreme Court that is, has said is not subject to any judicial review. So if you push too hard, they have that measure to fall back on, and I disagree with it, but they absolutely have the power.
There is a heightened sense of anxiety for Canadians traveling south of the border, and from what I hear from you, it's warranted because we don't know. You used to be able to cross and understand what you needed and didn't need to cross. You knew how far to push and how far to push legally in order to make it work in your favor, and that all seems to have changed. So we know that there's less Canadians traveling to America right now because of increased tensions. More than 1.6 million Canadians traveled to the U.S. last month. So what advice do you have for Canadians who have U.S. travel plans this summer?
Well, I think you need to do a self-assessment. I think you have to ask, is the trip really worth it? Because of families on both sides of the border, there are a lot of compelling reasons why people just need to cross. But if you don't, you may want to reassess your travel plans. If you've ever been detained by the police in Canada, if you've ever been arrested, if you've ever had a disposition, even if you think it's not a criminal conviction, you want to do a deep check. I advise people who are vulnerable to order their own criminal record from the RCMP before crossing. If you're a foreign national, if you're a Canadian permanent resident, you may need to go beyond that. But the one thing a Canadian needs to know is that particularly with Canada, we have very deep access to your criminal information system. On a given day, we run more Canadian police background checks than the city of Montreal. That's how many we do. So many border agents are wired to see small discrepancies in files, even when they don't see a conviction. And many Canadian adjudications, which aren't convictions for any other purpose, are convictions for immigration purposes, conditional discharges, pardons, and many other things.
This is great information to have. A little troubling, but good to have the information. Knowledge is power. Immigration lawyer Stuart Friedman, thanks so much for coming on. I should mention to everyone at home, we did request to speak with Christopher Landry. He declined our request, saying he has received legal advice not to make any further comments to the media on his case. If you like that video, make sure to subscribe to the Your Morning YouTube feed, where you can find all kinds of new content posted every weekday morning.